Honourable Member for Random Buren St. George's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise today to speak to Bill C-38, the first implementation bill of Budget 2012. An omnibus bill that, of course, should never have been. If we want to talk about the budget, that's one thing, but when you throw everything into this bill and make it impossible for Canadians to have a real handle on exactly what it is in this budget, then that causes a problem, not only for me as a Member of Parliament representing the people of Random Buren St. George's, but I would expect for all MPs who take great exception to what the government has done here. Canadians from coast to coast to coast anxiously awaited this budget as they continue to struggle to make ends meet. And I know that from first-hand experience, Madam Speaker, just in my own riding of Random Buren St. George's. There are difficult times, and particularly when you talk about seasonal industries, and that's another issue that with this government we need to deal with. But with sporadic job growth in the last 6 months and thousands of full-time jobs being replaced with part-time jobs, Canadians expected this budget to focus on jobs. Unfortunately, this government let Canadians down once again. Rather than focus on much-needed job creation, the government has chosen to focus on dividing Canadians. Since 2006, this government has sought to divide Canadians. It is obvious that Budget 2012 is no different. Given the damage that will be done by this budget, it is impossible for anyone concerned about the future of our country to support its implementation. As this government irresponsibly pits generation against generation, and we see that with the OAS changes, region against region, economy against environment, and when you consider that over 120 pages of this budget deals with the environment, it is reckless. And in a reckless quest to divide and conquer, the government has done all of these things. Canadians stand united in opposition to this government's dangerous politics and policies. Liberals have never shied away from ensuring that government is run efficiently. As members debate the implementation of this austerity budget, it is important to remember how Canada's economy reached this stage. The last Liberal government left the Conservatives with a $13 billion surplus, and the Conservatives promptly spent the Liberal surplus into a Conservative deficit well before the recession. In fact, the Conservatives have the distinction of being the highest spending, largest deficit-creating government in Canadian history. And now they're trying to have Canadians take responsibility for that. They're taking it out now on the backs of Canadians. Had the Conservatives not spent so much irresponsibly before the recession, Canada's deficit will be nowhere as high as it is today. Bill C-38 is the first in a series that will attempt to implement the Conservative slash-and-burn agenda and cause havoc in Atlantic Canada in particular, as federal jobs and services are cut. The Conservative government began a slash-and-burn agenda in the 2010 Strategic Review, which saw $32 million in cuts over 3 years to the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, with an additional $17.9 million in new permanent cuts. These new cuts in Budget 2012 represent nearly 20% of ACOA's entire operating budget. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians rely on ACOA to create opportunities for economic growth in the region, just as the rest of Atlantic Canada does. Now is hardly a time to cut programs that stimulate the economy, help create jobs, and increase federal tax revenue in the process. Adding to the $6.6 million in cuts over 3 years to Marine Atlantic, which occurred in the last budget, Budget 2012 cuts an additional $10.9 million in new permanent cuts. These cuts are especially difficult for my constituents when you consider that the Marine Atlantic Ferry service is our connection to the rest of the country. These cuts also include the closing of vitally important washing stations in Channel and Port-aux-Basques and Argentia. Some vehicles, Madam Speaker, that need to be washed off because they have picked up the contaminated soil that's prevalent in Newfoundland and Labrador. They carry the potato wart and the potato cyst nematode, infected soil. Washing the vehicles ensures that contaminated soil isn't exported to other Canadian provinces, and where it could do irreparable harm, and particularly in PEI and in New Brunswick, to the multi-billion-dollar potato industry in this country. History shows even a minor infestation in a potato-producing area can have serious consequences. In 2000, when a small area, a mere 24 hectares of Prince Edward Island soil, was found to have been contaminated by the potato wart fungus, the United States moved immediately to close its borders to PEI potatoes for months. This resulted in a $22 billion loss to PEI potato farmers. For a province such as Prince Edward Island, where the potato industry is a major contributor to their economy, the loss of this industry would be as devastating as the cod moratorium to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. And I can just only explain to you, Madam Speaker, how devastating that was when today that cod moratorium is still in existence. The cod has not returned, and I can only imagine how it would be in PEI if the contaminated soil were to impact the potato industry there to the extent that the cod moratorium has impacted Newfoundland and Labrador. Of particular concern to my constituents in Random-Buren, St. George's, and the many coastal communities in Canada, in fact, is the dangerous approach this government has taken to the fishery. Last year's budget cut the Department of Fisheries and Oceans by $84.8 million over 3 years, while this budget goes further, permanently cutting an additional $79.3 million from the DFO budget. Worse, the government is rolling the dice when it comes to fish management strategy by cutting the financial capacity for evidence-based fish monitoring and protection of fish habitats and removing the protection of many freshwater fish species. Even Conservatives are upset with this attack on the fishery, Madam Speaker. Former Conservative Fisheries Minister Tom Sidden said, and I quote, "This is a covert attempt to gut the Fisheries Act, and it's appalling that they should be attempting to do this under the radar," end of quote. In addition to the Conservatives' cuts to the fishery, this government is considering sweeping changes to the fleet separation and owner-operated policies, which would directly affect 30,000 jobs and destroy small rural fishing communities. If DFO were to cancel the fleet separation policy, allowing large processors to engage in the inshore fishery, the traditional harvester would eventually be squeezed out of the industry. Clearly, the Conservatives have no interest in seeing the fishery survive. I also have concerns with the proposed changes to employment insurance, and I mentioned that earlier, Madam Speaker, the changes to employment insurance of Bill C-38. While not all changes are negative, we do know already from Budget 2012 that instead of working to help create more jobs, this government is increasing a direct tax on employment by hiking the employment insurance premiums by $600 million. EI recipients must apply for suitable employee vacancies to qualify for benefits. Bill C-38 deletes the provisions that deem employment opportunities to not be suitable if the opportunity is in the claimant's usual occupation or not, and offers a lower rate pay or in working conditions that are less favorable than the claimant has a right to expect. Only something that we would all expect, Madam Speaker. This bill also unduly grants the government the power, gives the minister the power to make changes to the EI Act without legislation and parliamentary approval, by giving the minister the power to change the definition of suitable employment. What is suitable employment, Madam Speaker? And there was no consultation whatsoever with either employers or with employees with respect to these changes to the EI. The Conservatives have yet to announce details of what they will consider suitable employment, yet they expect Parliament to grant them unrestricted power to do so. And people are nervous. People are naturally scared, not knowing what to expect. One has to wonder if the government's end game is to force Atlantic Canadians to relocate permanently to Alberta for work or accept jobs outside of their skill area. There's no discussion about training, appropriate training for people. And of course, when you get to the age of 55, 60, Madam Speaker, particularly if you've been working in a fish plant all of your life, and in a lot of cases in seasonal industry in the fish plant, what are you going to retrain for? What other skill are you going to retrain for at that age in your life? Is at a time when you'd like to retire. And you'd like to retire at age 65, as has always been the case. But Madam Speaker, this government has seen fit to move that age of eligibility now from 65 to 67, making it even more difficult on people who work in demanding environments. In contrast to this government's attempt to implement their austerity budget is the government's shockingly expensive advertising campaign to try to convince Canadians that the government is not failing Canada Not as bad as it seems, anyway. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments?